everybody that's on this webinar and the ones that will be joining. To thank you for joining us with this Physiatry Focus forum. So these are something that we have put together at ES Physiatry because we know that many people either entering their practices or thinking about their first job, or that are in jobs and reevaluating their options, or just looking to maybe grow and thrive, have a lot of questions that maybe don't get taught or answered in residency and may be difficult to find information for. So we have a series that we've done on various topics that come up a lot when we have physicians in circumstances like this contacting us and asking information. And today we wanted to focus on diversifying your practice, the key to security in a rapidly changing healthcare environment. And I'm sure everybody knows right now is one of the most rapidly changing healthcare environments we've experienced, at least in my career. And especially with COVID, it's put a lot of changes. And we've had a lot of people ask, how can I be safe in my practice and stay busy and stay profitable and useful despite all the changes? So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about these objectives. Joe, if you could get to the next slide. So we're going to talk about opportunities for physiatrists in various levels of care throughout the post-acute continuum. We're going to try to understand how to practically work in more than one level of care in a way that synergizes with healthcare networks and other physiatrists. And then I want to help everybody be aware of strategies that make your practice less vulnerable during times of volatility. Next slide. And just a little bit about my perspective so you know where I'm coming from. I'm board certified in PM&R, spinal cord and brain. I've done private practice basically since 1990, and was one of the practices that opened up with a line of credit and got my own office lease and hired my own staff and put in employee manuals and all that good stuff, and did that for many years until 2012. And then at that time, basically took an academic role as the chair at the University of Texas Austin PM&R Medical School residency program, and did that until 2012. And then my husband got a fabulous opportunity in Seattle. And so now I'm living in Seattle and working basically with the University of Washington, as well as US Physiatry as Chief Clinical Officer. And in that capacity, I essentially practice in every level of care. I've done, and I still do, acute care consults this week from the ICU on, IRF coverage, skilled nursing consults, LTAC coverage, and actually I've even run some spinal cord and other clinics over this last year. So I kind of thought I had seen it all, because I've seen healthcare evolve from times of managed care to ACOs to inpatient rehab being expanded and then being compressed, and then skilled nursing being expanded and then compressed. And what happened this last year with COVID is essentially everything I'd seen got flipped upside down and all turned around, and just a lot of the rules for things that we've done for decades basically got changed. Next slide. So the question becomes, why and what is a diversified practice? And what I can tell you is having a diversified practice has absolutely saved me and saved a lot of physicians in terms of just all the changes that are happening in healthcare and just being able to stay viable as a small business or as a group. And it's allowed us to thrive and essentially stay busy even when maybe one part of your practice may dry up. And it's been this way really since 1990. A lot of the changes that we're seeing right now, the one thing that I can promise you is there's going to be more and more changes in the future. And the answer for staying thriving essentially is diversify your practice and to stay flexible. So a diversified practice is similar to like when they tell you should have a diversified retirement portfolio, that you have some stocks and some bonds and some cash, because if the stock market crashes, you basically have still other assets that you can use. And you're always looking at how you can maximize each element of your portfolio. And to some extent, that's what we're talking about when we talk about a diversified practice portfolio. So the benefits of having a practice portfolio that's flexible, meaning you can turn on a dime and do other things, or you can ramp up some things and slow down some things as needed, depending on the market and what's happening, is it helps your practice thrive even if other parts of healthcare continuum aren't thriving. And it does allow you maximum flexibility. And I think I was talking with a resident today, and they're just like, anxious about coming out right now, and what is it going to look like, a job, when I get out, like in 2 years, if I have this goal right now of doing X, is X going to still be viable? And what I have said to them is, with the skill sets we have in physiatry, our usefulness really doesn't change no matter what happens with healthcare. And actually, the more turbulent the healthcare environment, the more they need us. So diversification is what helps protect us from losses of volume due to market shifts, financial losses, due to loss of income because you're seeing less patients or seeing different types. And the really sad thing that we are seeing a lot of is layoffs and undesired changes in your role, because two things are happening with healthcare systems. If their volumes are decreased and things especially that are profitable, they're looking for ways to either cut costs or to get their physicians and their providers, if you will, to be more productive. And so you have situations like large group practices like my husband's, where they're really leaning on all the clinicians for more productivity. And they're adding like nights and weekends, and they're having to see a lot more patients in a shorter time. But then we also have seen a situation where healthcare systems are actually laying off entire groups of doctors, the ones that are fantastic doctors and have served them well for decades. But just the truth is, they just can't afford the overhead, and they can't afford to have that product line because perhaps they don't know how to bill and collect it as efficiently as a physician-driven group does, or they just don't know how to maximally make that group productive. Next slide. So why is this a good strategy? All you really need to do is look at COVID and what happened, and you can see why being flexible and having diversified practice can make a big difference in terms of what you're doing. So, during COVID-19, there were a lot of office closures or changes. Like I had to do my clinic almost exclusively by telemedicine. And what was interesting is for the offices that, are only 100% outpatient, stakes were pretty high. There were decreased volumes for a while, but you still had a lot of the overhead, which was a challenge because you still have to pay your rent. Your employees are really hoping they're going to get a paycheck, at least, unless federal funds come in. And you also still have a lot of fixed cost. So, it's not like those costs go away if you're not seeing patients. And it's the same thing, with decreased volumes of elective procedures, there's also been a change in the types of patients you see in environments. So like what used to look like a typical like inpatient rehab patient, might end up looking more like a skilled nursing patient, just because of the shifts, because the hospitals are needing those beds for other purposes, or they're prioritizing certain types of patients within a healthcare system. So we've had to be flexible. Skilled nursing, I've seen facilities where we were just busting at the seams because the hospitals had to get patients out, to actually going down to 0 patients because a lot of the elective things dried up and they weren't getting knee replacements or other things, or patients that were getting those things weren't going to the facilities because they were afraid of getting COVID. So how did this impact the physiatrists? The bottom line is that it depended on your practice, the type of practice. Some people were way less busy and some people were way more busy. And so I've seen physiatrists that are taking up entire culinary experiences and doing lots of posts on Facebook because they have a lot of time and they're not as busy. But then I've also seen people that are working, 20-hour days and, still not getting done because there's so much to do. So the key thing that I want to point out is that if you have an office, your practice management costs, your rent, your utilities, your employees, your insurance is mostly going to be impacted by physicians, unless of course you're an employed physician, but ultimately it still is going to be your cost center. However, facility-based costs, which like one of my facilities had to spend $3.6 million on PPE. The cost of extra PPE, more staffing because you have more isolation, or you have to have units that are only for patients with COVID, and it impacts who can work where. All of those types of costs mostly impacted facilities. So facility-based costs and things that have happened with COVID really impact facilities. Office-based costs tend to impact us more. And what's been interesting is, despite all these changes, the need for physiatrists increased tremendously in facilities. And we have become one of the most needed specialties in the pandemic. Next slide. So why, are there opportunities, and what opportunities exist for us? Well, it goes back to the APM and our bold vision, the fact that we are essential medical experts in value-based evaluation, diagnosis, and management of neuromusculoskeletal and disabling conditions, and we're indispensable leaders. And this is, I think, one of the key things is being those leaders in directing rehabilitation recovery. Because one of the challenges has been, how do we flux the different types of patients that have been created by COVID and where do they go? And, we are really the ones that are vital in optimizing outcomes and function early and knowing what these different levels of care look like. I think everybody on this call knows what an appropriate inpatient rehab patient looks like. But our role has grown now to where we really are the specialty that really understands which patients are appropriate for skilled nursing and which ones are appropriate for LTAC and how to best accomplish goals there. And so all of these skills are needed, and they're going to be needed in the future, whether there's a COVID-19 epidemic or not. But the question is, how does this apply to the goal of having a diversified practice? Next slide. So the key thing to recognize is we're needed throughout the entire continuum of care. Acute care consults, inpatient rehab, long-term acute care hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, and home health has exploded too. And trying to optimize plans of care has gotten more complex because home health agencies are taking on different types of patients. And then also outpatient care is really growing because of the long haulers and other patients that now are not going to skilled nursing facilities or getting other types of care. Next slide. So there's some big questions, and we're going to try and touch on all of these things today. How can you diversify your practice to make it, quote, safe? What does this look like on a practical daily basis? And then how do you find or create these opportunities? And with this, I'm going to turn this over to Craig, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his practice, what he does, and we're going to start heading towards answering some of these questions.
Oh, thank you. Fantastic setup, Charlotte. I really appreciate it. And for all of that great information. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
So I'm Craig DiTomaso, and I'm the Director of Early Career Physician Development for U.S. Physiatry. Go ahead. And I'll give you a little bit of my background as well. So I'm board certified in PM&R as well as traumatic brain injury with a special focus on disorders of consciousness. I see patients currently in inpatient rehab, long-term acute care, skilled nursing, and I do a fair number of acute care consults. I've been doing this since about 2019. During that time, my administrative roles include being the medical director at my inpatient rehab facility. And prior to that, I was the medical director for a large academic center that had 5 inpatient rehab sites. Academically, I am pending an appointment at UTMB, which is Galveston, for those of you not from Texas, and I was previously with Baylor College of Medicine. Through U.S. Physiatry, as the Director of Early Career Physician Development, I've been working a lot on young physicians, on teaching them about how the healthcare continuum can be engaged by physiatrists, and that's, again, acute care, rehab, skilled nursing, and LTAC where appropriate. And I've been doing that since 2020. Also, I have to say I'm a big proponent of the exoskeleton, and I am a speaker and consultant for that company. Go ahead. So I think what I would like to focus on or to emphasize to this group is that, PM&R is a really unique field. When people don't know what physiatry is and they ask me to tell them, I tell them other doctors tend to get really focused on one area or organ, right? Like a neurologist is typically all about the brain, or a cardiologist all about the heart. In rehab, that's just not the case, right? Our focus is much more on helping a person recover. The actual diagnosis typically is less important for the most part. That empowers us in a lot of ways to really work in different areas at the same time, because that recovery may span several levels of care and may change over time. And so I think that, being a physiatrist, we have a really unique advantage on that. I think that physiatrists who understand that, they have a special value. They don't see themselves pigeonholed, as Dr. Smith was kind of talking about, but they really have a way of applying their knowledge and helping a patient transition through their recovery, and that makes them really powerful, and I think gives the ability to help the patient with their healing process and to really progress. So based on that, if you're appropriately set up as a physiatrist, you can be very agile and flexible. And as conditions change, as environments change, as things come in and out of favor or funding, you can kind of pick and choose your spots because you are so agile and flexible, and because you're not particularly tied to an organ system or to a level of care, but to a process of recovery, which is really beautiful. So therefore, I think the real value or power in the field of PM&R is being broad and diverse. Even though my primary focus in the area that I'm most passionate about is the severe traumatic brain injury with prolonged disorders of consciousness, that doesn't mean that I can't go see somebody with a knee or a hip and offer them something as well. I can't see these COVID patients and apply some of the same principles to help them recover and return to their health. So I think that physiatrists as a group, our number one thing is just our ability to adapt to whatever the patient needs. Once you do that in a marketplace, I think you're just very able to capture more business. Personally, I can speak from experience during COVID. There were times where my rehab was very full and the SNF was empty. And then towards the end, it seemed to flip. And that wasn't life-threatening to me. That wasn't going to destroy my livelihood for that month, because I could simply flow over to the skilled nursing facility and adapt, or flow back to the inpatient rehab without missing a beat. So I think, the best thing that I've seen about US Physiatry, the reason I feel like this is a good fit and can really benefit a lot of young physiatrists, is that if you build a busy and successful practice based on holistic evidence-based medicine, you can keep yourself busy and on the straight and narrow. Some early career physicians, I think, are often what's the right word? Maybe mesmerized or fooled by this idea that they're going to find some new product or some new niche where they're going to be able to sell patients something that maybe the evidence isn't quite there yet, maybe is a little bit fringe. And, maybe it pays off, but maybe it doesn't. And I think that I hate to see physicians move in that pathway purely for financial gains, right? Because that will change. All of that is always evolving. And tying yourself to something like that, I think, is really deleterious. You compromise yourself, your ethics, and you come chasing a dollar sign at some point. When you have a nice big practice with lots of different areas to help people, it's easy to kind of pivot within what you're comfortable with, within what the evidence and solid physiatry principles allow, and help a lot of people, on a daily basis and without compromising your ethics. So I think that's an important part. It's good for the patients, it's good for you as a physician, and it really, I think, benefits everybody in healthcare. Go ahead, Joe. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Michael Lupinacci. Thank you for allowing me to talk on this.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation this evening. Thanks to Charlotte and Craig. I always love hearing you all talk, and I hang on every word because I get new ideas when I hear it presented from different perspectives. So thank you for doing that for the group tonight. Next slide. So presently, I'm the CMO of US Physiatry, and I've been in practice quite a long time. I won't say how long, but it's more than 2 decades. It's actually been 3. I'm board certified in PM&R and pain management. So until 6 years ago, I was in private practice, and I had a really large and broad practice. Our base was inpatient rehabilitation, and we did a lot of outpatient musculoskeletal care and pain management. And the practice owned and operated an interventional spinal center. We actually did work in skilled nursing facilities, and we did work in LTAC. So it was a practice that was started on very basic principles that Craig and Charlotte went over, is that what we can do is very broad, and the practice was very broad. And then for a number of reasons, I transitioned to US Physiatry because I realized physicians, physiatrists, they really need a unifying group, a unifying business platform, and unifying clinical principles. So that was my motivation, and to work with these great people I work with every day. So right now, I'm still in clinical practice. I'm the medical director of a 60-bed freestanding, and we still do SNF work and LTAC work, all inpatient sectors. And I did my time with the academy in the past, and I'm doing some more academy work in the future with helping them with the Medical Leadership Institute, which I think is, I've always thought was a superb idea to help elevate physiatrists to whatever leadership levels they want to go to in the future of healthcare in the U.S. So I had a couple of academic roles in my past, and that's where I'm at right now. So next slide, Joe. What I wanted to do is amplify a little bit on the practical aspects of application of diversifying your practice. And Charlotte has already emphasized how it can promote clinical and economic health. And by clinical health, number one, you can utilize your broad skills in all those settings. And economic health, you can insulate yourself from the dramatic changes. But in physiatry, we really don't want to be isolated in one sector, especially ongoing in healthcare, because healthcare is going to be extraordinarily challenging. It has been, and it will be, and that will not end in our lifetimes. The interesting thing is, because we're a large organization, we get a lot of experience with physicians in different situations. So I'll give you an example. Recently, I talked to an outpatient pain management physician. He sees 30 patients a day, 150 patients a week, and that's what he's done his entire career. He's mid-career. And he said, listen, I need to get out of those four walls. I need to use my skills. I need to see something different clinically. I need a new intellectual challenge based on my skills. So case in point, we have broad skills. If you want to do one thing all your life, it can get a little boring. So we have opportunities to do many things. We're very fortunate in this field. The other types of things in physician situations we've seen is that the diversification, as Charlotte mentioned, improves your economic stability, because you have work in a number of different settings. For instance, we've had interventionalists who, certainly in the time of COVID, have come to us to work with us in the inpatient domain, using their primary basic skills they learned in residency. Big change for them, both philosophically and clinically. But they realized then that they may have boxed themselves in a bit much in the volatile world of healthcare changes. So again, that's not uncommon for us to see those levels of interest. The other issue is that, as Charlotte mentioned, Dada. It's a Dada. You see Dada? Thank you. As we mentioned, the risk for outpatient is high risk, and the risk for inpatient is low risk. The risk for outpatients is high overhead. The risk for inpatients is no risk. It's low overhead, and that is really huge in a volatile economic and clinical climate. And the other thing, I think, to me, this trumps a lot of the other things we've talked about, is that you get to maintain all your skills, all the skills you used in residency from day one, all those things that captured your intellectual interest in your original motivation to go into medicine. You use that entire spectrum of skills and you maintain them over time. Next slide, Joe. You're muted. Next slide, Joe. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I can go with this one. No, go back, Joe. Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
I see you changed it. It looks good. So the thing about diversification, it requires you as an individual personally and your clinical workflow to be efficient and effective. And the purpose of this slide is because you may be working in multiple settings, and I had been a really good example of that. I was inpatient setting, I was in SCIFs, I was in LTACs, I was an outpatient. We did some home health, we were interventional medicine, we were in pain. We did all of those. So that was the ultimate in diversification. But one of the things, you need really good practice management and administration, because each of those domains is a different world. It's a different world in many ways. The way things are organized for the facility, the way things are organized for billing and collections on your personal part. So you need a really strong management sector that's not going to just go for low-hanging fruit, for instance, in the billing and collections domain, but is really going to work for you. And I think in US Physiatry, I can tell you honestly, we excel at that diversification and that expertise, that broad level of expertise. Again, there will be a lot of personal schedule management, right? Because if you're going to 1 or 2 or 3 facilities, that changes things up for you. And so it's a matter of being highly organized on your work schedule, and that impacts your personal schedule as well. And then there are issues with documentation, auditing, and billing, because each of those settings has different types of documentation requirements. They're similar in rehabilitation, but there are subtle yet important differences. And you need to be up to date on those, and you need to be able to have your documentation looked at and making sure it's appropriate and accurate for that level of facility that you're seeing. Next slide, Joe. So, and again, beyond those, what I want to impart here is when you go, for instance, if you start work in a SNF, the team process is completely different, and the leadership skills that you're going to need as you walk in as the physiatrist, and you may well be the first physiatrist likely, that team management and those leadership skills are going to be essential for you to be successful, because sometimes those different facilities, whether it be an LTAC or a SNF or an IRF, or even home health or an assisted living, their organization is completely different in how you blend in and work with a team, and how you lead the team as the rehabilitation expert are really going to make or break the success in that facility. And I will tell you, because all of these facilities have different ownership, they have different personnel policies and procedures, they have different levels of skill sets, that it's going to take adaptability, persistence, and change management 100% across all those, all within our capability. But you just need to realize it's really they're all different animals as you work within them. And then you're going to need to develop a detailed knowledge of operations in each setting. And I already mentioned that, but the operations of an LTAC are really different than an operations of a SNF. They're really different than an operations of an IRF and assisted living. So you're going to need to know how those facilities operate, how they are successful, how the teams coordinate, and what their criteria are for getting people in, keeping people in, and getting people out. And again, we spend a lot of time in US Physiatry in educating our own physicians so that they learn from other people's experience. Next slide, Joe. So there's some basics. These basics never change. They're really the same basics as an IRF, but it's going to require more effort, because IRFs know who we are. They know what we do. It's a natural organization facility. We all trained in them. And their center is medical rehabilitation. So the way you can amplify your relationships with the other facility leaders is to make really good work relationships with the medical director and the administrator. Initially, to clarify roles, to understand what you do, and to meet regularly with them to make sure, as their situations change, that you're a part of that knowledge base and willing to help. The second thing is you need to form a strong clinical alliance with the clinical leaders. Who are the clinical leaders? The director of therapies, PT, the director of PT, the director of OT, the director of speech, or maybe the clinical thing. Very important. So it's going to take a little time for you to really form those working relationships and understand them and have them understand you. And the last thing on this slide is very simple. And I think as physicians, we're much better at this than other type of professions. Deliver what you promise. For instance, if you promise, I'll be there twice a week, I'm looking at, Tuesdays and Fridays, be there twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. And if you can't be there communicate with them. But whatever it is you promise you will do, you need to be consistent and follow up in doing that with them. Or if something needs to change, you communicate how you need to change it and when you'll be available, for instance, to see patients. Next slide, Joe. So again, some of the overreaching things, again, which is so natural for PM&R, but I guess my my request is that you be that you talk it, that you always prioritize patient care and patient family satisfaction, right? Because we're the best at it. But let these other types of settings understand that that's really your number one goal to help their facility. All facilities will have metrics, length of stay, transfers to acute, all these metrics that we have in the IRF, they're developing these other settings. So you need to get familiar with them and see in what ways you can help promote their metrics. And the other thing is, again, it should go without saying that you need to respect the environment and the politics. So for instance, I work in presently 3 for-profit settings, 1 super wealthy private setting, and 1 county skilled nursing facility. You can imagine how the environments and the politics are so different in all those, but you need to keep an ear for that, and respect it and morph with it a bit for those facilities. And then we already talked about developing practice efficiency, but I wanted to emphasize that because that's so critical for you to be success in the time you spend in these other settings. So at this point in time, we've described why diversification is so fundamentally important, why we as physiatrists have the ability to diversify, why our patients need us in every setting. They need our care. And right now, there's just not enough of us everywhere, in any domain. So I think the need is there. Our specialty's roots are in caring for all of these patients with disabilities and pain, and on the upside is you'll have plenty of work to do, which will sustain the success of your practice over time if you look at it in a broader picture. So now I think we'll see if any of the participants have any questions. We'd love to hear them. I think Charlotte's going to play question the doctor's
Sure.
answer, which is great. But
if you guys have questions, feel free to hit the raised hand feature, and we're happy to take any questions or comments that you guys may have. This sounds sort of overwhelming. Like when I talk to my residents, a lot of them, they have no clue. Like, how would this work on a daily basis? I mean, are you driving to 6 different places, and how do you practically learn the rules, if you will, for all these different environments? And honestly, when I first started doing a lot of the skilled nursing and the LTAC, there were no rules. It was not taught in residency or any fellowship. And, that's just the way it is. You learn by doing. But what has been really helpful is we've grown and developed quite a team. And so we help each other out a lot. And also the other thing that I think, has been really helpful for US Physiatry has been when we get overwhelmed or busy, then we can call on each other to help cover. But Craig, tell us a little bit about you. You're a very, very busy doctor. And how do you balance like all the variable facilities and needs? And what is your strategy like on a daily or weekly basis like?
Yeah, I think my strategy is a lot like what Mike was describing. I have my LTAC day, I have my SNF day. Acute care consults, obviously, those are a little bit of a different beast, so you've got to kind of scramble. But again, relying on the power of US Physiatry, we have a number of other physiatrists in the area, so we can kind of cover those as a group. So it really just depends. Again, if I'm busy at the rehab, then I decrease the skilled days. If I'm busy at the LTAC, I may decrease the rehab or the skilled days. And then when the rehab's very busy, obviously everything else decreases as well. So I think that while it may seem overwhelming, one thing I would say is obviously you build it bit by bit. I didn't start my first day covering all of those places. I started with just the rehab when that was up and running and going well. Added the skilled nursing once that was up and running. Added the LTAC, and so you slowly grow as you become more comfortable and more efficient. And I think that's what's worked for me. But what do you guys have to say?
I think I would just say you just stole all my thunder, Craig. So it's great. That's exactly how it's done. I think that it's important. We're fortunate enough in the organization to, as Craig mentioned, have other providers that are USP providers that are around us in our location. And I know Craig's team in Houston is a tight team. People really pull together as much as they can because they know they will help each other in the clinical domains and in the weekend coverage domains and holiday coverage domains and any other domain. And that's the type of pod, that we call it a pod, that we like to see in our clinical geographic areas where there's a lot of support. That does help with us diversify because, if you don't have time to run to the LTAC because your IRF admissions just soared, then you can work it out with a small core group of people who are willing to pull together. And I think that's very, very helpful.
It's also helpful to the facilities because when they have one group to work with and they see that we're doing a great job, two things happen. One, they call us to do more things and more opportunities open up, and also other facilities go, wow, we want some of that. And I think that's one of the big questions is just how do we develop these relationships and these opportunities? And I think it gets back to what Mike said with the basics of, you do a great job with each opportunity that you have and try to help each facility or group or whatever that you're working with thrive by using our skill sets. And then the opportunities just grow. And that's partly why there's such a demand. So we had a question from, I want to say that's Ara, maybe Ara.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you want to ask for us or have some comments about?
Actually, my question is, what do you consider great care? Do you see that facilities, especially acute inpatient rehab facilities, great care becomes more of an outcome-driven average thing instead of actual, great care the way we know it? And how do you navigate that?
Well, that's a great question. I was just talking about that with another doctor today. We're used to the time where there were just multitudes of CRRNs and huge numbers of therapists and clinical program directors and program specialists and tremendous resources. And part of, I think, what we bring to the table, and I'll be curious to see what Craig and Mike think, is the ability to get the best out of what we have to work with. And, what's really interesting is that there's no area of medicine with more variability in quality and outcomes than skilled nursing. And there's good, there's bad, and there's ugly. And so what's very interesting is sometimes we get called to the good facilities to make them great. And sometimes we get called to the not so good facilities to make them good. And we try to stay away from the ones that aren't great. But one of the common denominators is that our role as basically team leaders tends to have ripple effects in many ways. We can help them with program development. We can help retain staff by promoting education and helping each team feel valued or feel competent in what they're doing. And so, I think it's just a fact in healthcare that we may not always have the same amount of resources in what we have thought was clinical excellence as was available in the past. But what I have found that's really interesting is that the longer you're with a facility and you work with them and the less turnover there is, even with less resources, you can give outstanding care. And like one of the skilled nursing facilities I'm working at right now, one of the huge compliments we had is we had a hugely complicated polytrauma with spinal cord and some head injury stuff and multiple extremity fractures. And they were in the skilled nursing facility. And we do something called staged rehab, where they, after spending a certain amount of time and they're able to wait there and their wounds are better and they have enough endurance tolerance for inpatient rehab, we ramp them up to inpatient rehab. And what was so interesting is this particular patient said, I really don't think I want to leave. This has been so great. And I'm getting such great care here and such great quality of rehabilitation. And, and that's a huge compliment. But, I think that's kind of our role is to promote excellence with what you have to work with. I don't know if that's kind of what you were asking.
Actually, yeah, and that's close to what I was actually going to say next. That in my experience lately, at least, that nursing facilities are becoming what old school rehabs were, and
Yes.
rehab hospitals are becoming just. I'm not going to even use a word for that.
Interesting. Mike, you probably have a perspective on that. You've been doing this a long time, over the decades, like me, and have seen the evolution.
I do. I do. I think it's a great question. And it's an extremely important question. Those two things first. So as I see it, our role as physiatrists, let's start with the herbs. And I understand what you're saying, is really right now, if you think about it, we are the most powerful influencer of advocating for our patients. So when there's a give and a tug between clinical administration, right? And I know you know what that is. I think part of our job and our expertise is to help everyone understand what are the consequences of a bad decision that's not going to advocate for this patient's health, right? Because that's what it comes down to. So I think right now, even though I understand what you're saying, I think in the big picture, your patients want to hear from the physician. They want to know what your opinions are, and that matters. That matters. So that's my solution to the tug between administrative demands and the clinical demands of the patient. And we right now we have that card, that upper hand, and that responsibility. And some days it's not easy because it does take a lot of influencing. But in the end, we're the people that have the ability and need to spend the energy doing that. Prime example of that is our lovely peer-to-peers, right? You can talk to somebody that makes no sense on the other side other than they're checking boxes and you failed on your request. So anyways, my point is we're the ones to do it. So I think if you do the best job that you can, then you've done everything you can do to improve the quality of care. The other thing on the SNFs, and I could go on forever, so I'm going to make this really brief. I agree with you on the SNFs. On the upside, and we've worked in, like Charlotte says, we worked in great SNFs. We've worked in SNFs that the care deteriorated. But I always tell the young doctors and the residents, listen, the standard of care, the bar is raised the minute you walk in the door of a SNF, because you know from a rehab perspective what's being done well and what's being done poorly. So for those intrepid who want to walk through those doors, that's kind of our mission. It's nice if it's a good SNF, but in COVID, the good SNFs everyone's fallen apart a little bit. The good ones, the bad ones, the in-between ones. So it's been a rough year for SNFs. And frankly, we've always thought IRFs are going to kind of die down and SNFs are going to kind of build up their services. Personally, I'm not a believer in that. I think it's too big an ask, seeing the fragility of SNFs this past year.
Craig, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you all have covered it pretty well.
Okay, we have another question. Beth, what was your question?
Thanks. I actually have two questions. How do you recommend getting involved in the home health care arena? And secondly, what do you think the future of telemedicine, particularly as it relates to physiatry, is?
Great. You want to tackle that one, Mike?
Craig, do you want to first pass on that? I can comment on the home health thing as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'm fine. So I think that I think home health will play a large role, and I think we're going to have to be creative about how we use home health. And I think home health are going to have to evolve to fill that niche. And so I think that in the future, it only makes sense for physiatrists to be more involved, because they'll have to lead some of those home rehab programs now that were previously skilled nursing rehab programs or even inpatient rehab programs to some degrees. As far as telemedicine, I'm not the biggest telemedicine fan, and you can call me an old grumpy fart or whatever if you want, but I just feel like so much of the physiatric exam and evaluation has got to be hands-on. Is there a role for check-ins and follow-ups? I think probably, but I just can't see getting away from feeling the spasticity, seeing the weakness in the muscle, observing the gait while you're there to see how the muscles are firing and the balance. So I'm sure telemedicine will continue to grow. I'm sure physiatrists will be involved, but it's too much for me to swallow to think I won't touch patients anymore. So I'll throw it back to you, Mike.
I agree on the home health comments. One of our medical directors actually was a medical director in a home health agency. So I think there's a lot of potential, and I can actually see if you approached a really good home health agency and asked them, would you like to have a physiatrist that can advise and counsel you on your rehabilitation services within your home health? That I think that would open up a discussion now much more than in the past. So, how it gets reimbursed and how all that happens, that is a new horizon. But I think as far as the need is definitely there. And telemedicine, I agree with Craig's point, is that rehab, we're such a visual, tactile specialty. We're like a three-dimensional specialty. And so I think that does present some challenges. On the population health side, I can see a lot of people with disabilities who can't get out of the house. That, if they can't come to you, or if it's an ambulance ride or, a wheelchair ambulance ride, maybe a telehealth visit is going to help some of those people, certainly in primary care. But in PM&R, that remains to be determined how much we can assist them. But I think there's some potential there.
Two other things to mention on both of those topics. So home health, our role starts even before home health sees them. So like there are federal requirements for a face-to-face where you justify the services that are being prescribed and the need for them, the necessity. And what's interesting is every level keeps getting squeezed. So inpatient rehab stays are shorter, and skilled nursing stays are shorter. And, now home health is getting much more complex people. All the people who didn't go to a SNF or an IRF after COVID, or with elective procedures, they're afraid of COVID, and they go straight home. It's a higher acuity with more need. And it's also, they're getting like neuro patients, and they're getting more than just the traditional debilitated, deconditioned, patient that was elderly. I mean, they're like complex patients. And so our being involved with the original prescription of what needs to happen and being a resource to help with the transition is something that they really appreciate. I can pretty much guarantee you there's going to be more audits of home health, looking at the necessity of it. And I think that the facilities I've seen that actually have a physiatrist doing the face-to-face and really justifying the goals and the purpose of the rehabilitation, it's really important. What would be interesting is in a lot of facilities like skilled nursing, the physiatrist also oversees the plans of care so that we know that the PT that's being provided in that facility is necessary and reasonable. Potentially that should be happening as well with home health. And the challenge right now is the primary care doctors tend to be the ones signing off on it. But, the primary care doctors, number one, it's a burden to them because they have so much coming at them. I mean, right now they're like really where the rubber hits the road in healthcare right now. They're overwhelmed at the volumes. But, to have to read through a plan of care and determine whether it's truly an appropriate plan of care or whether it's just time to cut that off is not something that's really within their scope. So I think there will be more of a role. I think the home health agencies are going to be needing more expertise to guide them and justify things. And then the other question, I'm trying to remember what it was. Remind me again. About
telemedicine.
Oh, telemedicine. Yes, this is something else to realize. We don't have enough physiatrists to go to all the inpatient rehab facilities, but there are mandatory requirements that you have a physiatrist. And as you guys know, there have been challenges to that where they were going to let any willing provider be the medical director, which could include nurse practitioners or PAs. And I think that unfortunately, if that happened, there would be differences in the care and the rehabilitation that's provided in those facilities. So one real encouraging arena for us would be partnering, for example, with nurse practitioners, physician assistants, or other specialists where, for example, we would be at the facility, 1 or 2 days a week for the hands-on, but maybe overseeing team conferences or doing rounds in conjunction with them on other days to meet the requirements. But when you look at a facility, that if they can't get a physiatrist in there, and that's the only option, for basically being certified and meeting federal requirements, it puts them in a horrible position. And telemedicine could be a solution to that, until we eventually have enough, physiatrists. But I don't know that that'll ever happen with the population growth. And I think we sort of have to look at how can we partner with other people, because it's hard to staff all those facilities. So I think there's an opportunity there. Let's see. Oh, Ara, did you have another question?
Actually, you answered that question already about telemedicine. I thought that's what it was. And
telemedicine. You guys are asking great questions. We really appreciate you putting these up here, because it's good to kind of know what you guys are most interested in, and out of all the information we presented, what you want to hear more about. Any comments or feedback that people would like to hear more about specifics of things we've talked about? Actually,
I do have an actual question. Do you find it easy to go into, it not necessarily as part of an organization, but like individually, if you go to a nursing facility and just introduce yourself, do you find people, welcoming?
That's a great. Do you want to take that, Mike? I have some comments on that too.
Well, in brief, some are and some aren't. Profiles of the ones that are is that the administrator is familiar with physiatry, and or the medical director trained with physiatrists, right? If you got both of those happening, that's a really high probability you're going to work something out. The opposite is if the medical director never, was exposed to physiatry, they didn't train in a program that had physiatry, and the administrator never heard of physiatry, then that's going to be a hard sell. And I've been in both of those situations, even within the catchment area of Pennsylvania where I live. So yeah, you just don't know. It may be an administrator who had a family member that had a stroke and they were familiar with the rehabilitation process. So you're not going to know who is going to be in your court until you ask the question.
And it's very important to educate and clarify, because in so many of these facilities, you have to teach them how you can be useful. We typically have talking points, and even sitting down with them and talking about, like, how do you want to work with us? Do you want us to make recommendations and you guys write all the orders? Or do you want us to help you put out fires? Or what are some of the administrative things that you're doing that we might be able to take off your plate? Like all of the letters of necessity for durable medical equipment, reviewing the plans of care, helping with bowel and bladder issues, helping with spasticity, helping with pain issues, and really deciding, with that medical director, because we're really kind of in many ways at their mercy. We're there at their desire or not desire. And so figuring out how we can be really useful to them, and by working together, give the best care to these patients is really important. And I think a couple of things you have to emphasize to these medical directors that have never worked with us, or geriatricians, is that, we typically are billing for completely different things than they are. Like, you'll never see me bill for congestive heart failure or hypertension or diabetes management. And, one of the big concerns that comes up is, are we both going to get paid? And I think that the co-management model is now a standard, and it's acceptable. And most insurance companies understand that these patients are more medically complex than they were decades ago. And having two specialists involved to manage both the medical issues, the rehabilitation issues, is really beneficial. And, I have yet to ever have a circumstance where one or the other did not get paid, as long as we're both staying within our area of expertise and scope. So I think that's one of the biggest fears. The other big fear that you'll have is that you're going to come in, and I've seen this done before, and start writing all kinds of medication changes. And typically, if we're consultants, we're not on call 24/7, and we're not the first phone call from the nursing facility. And so if you take a geriatric patient and you give them a medication for pain, they may look comatose the next morning, and or in the middle of the night, they may have some adverse reaction. If they start getting phone calls about things like that, and you create problems that they have to manage, that never goes over very well. And so I think that's why it's extremely important to talk about, how you're going to work together, and to also just be really thoughtful that, our job is really, number one, to provide the best patient care and enhance the care the best we can. And number two, to help make everybody else who works there's jobs easier, not harder. And I think if you do that, it's a pretty easy sell. What do you think, Craig?
I mean, I think you hit the nail right on the head. You've got to help the patient, help the other doctors, help the facility move forward. That's when you're most powerful. And hopefully you're all aligned equally. I will say, as far as building new SNFs, again, I'm a big fan of doing this organically. And I can say just personally, I started in the rehab arena, obviously, that's where I'm more comfortable. And as I got to know my internal medicine and nephrology and other medical consultants, I started asking them, what skilled nursing facilities, what other places do you go to? Once I found kind of the place that most of them seemed to go to who I was already working, I got my privileges, and then I was able to talk to them. Hey, we work well together. Would you consider consulting me at the skilled nursing facility? I have privileges there. And again, it grew very organically. I think what I've seen some early career physiatrists do is to kind of saunter into the SNF with the 6-shooter on their hip and say, I'm the rehab doc. I'm going to come in and whip this place into shape. And that doesn't typically go over, especially if there's a tight-knit medical community where people already know how to work together. And so, back to Mike's original point about knowing the environment, understanding the lay of the land and the politics, you've got to come in with a little bit of humility on that and kind of test the water before you start changing everybody's bowel program and so forth.
But just
Absolutely.
to emphasize Craig's point really briefly, so the majority of SNF facilities that we're in, we are there with the medical group that service our inpatient rehab facility. So we've known each other for years, and they picked up these other facilities, and then it did happen organically. The real challenges are when you go to one where nobody quite knows you. So, but when you do go to a place where nobody quite knows you, you need to be prepared with information. Charlotte and Craig gave you information, but you need to have that prepared, whether it's meeting 1 with them or meeting 2 with them, of here's the diagnoses that you treat, here's how we can help you, and the team, nursing, there's a list. You just need to have that prepared. So you're concise but thorough within that, so they have a better understanding when they don't know anything about rehab.
So we are very close to the end of the hour. Beth, did you have one more question, or does anybody have one last question before we finish? I see your hand up, but I don't know, it may just not have been taken down.
No, thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions or any other comments that we can help with? We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. We believe in physiatry. We believe in all of you. We believe that by working together, we have this opportunity to really help patients and help the whole healthcare continuum. And this crisis especially, I think, has brought to the forefront, what a critical role we can have at every phase of healthcare. So we appreciate you joining us. If there's more questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. We are on the website, and I think we had our email addresses on the presentations. Joe might be able to put them back up. We'll be doing more of these physiatry focus forums, and we're typically picking topics that you don't get anywhere else. And the whole idea is that, we would like to help empower each of you to have fabulous careers. And we want to empower physiatry to be at the beginning of the food chain, but also the leaders in healthcare. So that's our interest in speaking with you. And as long as there's an interest, we'll keep providing these, and we'll have more, I think, coming up regularly throughout the year. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Just a comment, and thank you so much for organizing this. And just a quick comment, I think you said it absolutely correctly. We are the sleeping giant that I think soon will finally get our place in medicine that we deserve. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, guys.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Have a
Appreciate
good
it.
night. Bye-bye.